January 26, 1945. The temperature in the Colmar Pocket of eastern France hovers near zero. Snow covers the frozen fields. A young American lieutenant stands alone on top of a burning M10 tank destroyer, watching through binoculars as 250 German soldiers and 6 tanks advance toward his position. Behind him, his infantry company has retreated to the woods. He has ordered them to fall back because staying would mean certain death. But someone has to delay the German advance long enough for his men to establish a defensive line. Someone has to buy time with his own life. So, Lieutenant Audie Murphy climbs onto the burning tank destroyer whose crew has just been killed and whose ammunition is cooking off inside the hull, threatening to explode at any moment. He swings the .50 caliber machine gun toward the advancing Germans. And for the next hour he stands completely exposed on that burning vehicle in the middle of an open field, directing artillery fire by radio, while simultaneously firing the machine gun at German infantry, trying to flank his position. German soldiers fall in the snow as his bullets find them. German officers scream orders trying to coordinate an assault that will overwhelm this lone American. But Murphy keeps firing. The tank destroyer beneath him burns hotter. Ammunition inside begins to explode. Flames lick at his boots. German artillery shells explode around him, throwing up geysers of frozen earth and snow. Machine gun bullets snap past his head. Still he stands. Still he fires. And when his ammunition finally runs out, and the Germans are close enough that he can see their faces, he calmly climbs down from the burning wreck and walks back to his lines, still directing artillery fire that lands so close to his position that shrapnel tears his uniform. He reaches the tree line where his men stare at him in disbelief. He has just killed or wounded over 50 German soldiers by himself. He has held off an entire enemy company for an hour. And he has done it while standing on a vehicle that could have exploded beneath him at any second, killing him instantly. His legs are burned. He is bleeding from shrapnel wounds, but he refuses to be evacuated until the position is secure. This moment would earn Audie Murphy the Medal of Honor, but it was only one day in a combat career that spanned from Sicily to Germany and earned him every valor decoration America could award, including the Distinguished Service Cross, 2 Silver Stars, the Legion of Merit, and the Bronze Star. By the time World War II ended, Audie Murphy had become the most decorated American combat soldier of the war. He had killed over 240 enemy soldiers by official count, though the real number was likely much higher. He had been wounded 3 times. He had risen from private to officer in the field, and he had transformed from a shy farm boy who looked too young and too small to be a soldier into the deadliest American warrior in the European theater. But this incredible story of combat heroism is only part of Audie Murphy's story, because after the war Murphy would become a Hollywood star, playing himself in the movie version of his own autobiography. He would struggle with what we now call PTSD, suffering nightmares and flashbacks for decades. He would lose his fortune in bad business deals, and he would die at age 45 in a plane crash in Virginia, ending one of the most remarkable American lives of the 20th century. This is the complete story of Audie Murphy, the orphaned sharecropper's son who became America's greatest warrior, the baby-faced killer who could not escape the war even decades after it ended, the reluctant hero who defined American courage for an entire generation, and then showed that same generation what heroism really costs. Audie Leon Murphy was born on June 20, 1925, in a tiny farming community called Kingston in Hunt County, Texas, about 70 miles northeast of Dallas. He was the 7th of 12 children born to Emmett and Josie Bell Murphy, 2 desperately poor sharecroppers who worked land they did not own in exchange for a small share of the crops. The Murphy family lived in a succession of shacks and tenant farmer cabins, moving frequently as Emmett looked for better work or fled debts. The poverty the Murphy family experienced was not the relative poverty of missing luxuries. It was absolute grinding poverty where survival itself was uncertain. There were times when the family had literally nothing to eat. Times when the children went barefoot, because there was no money for shoes. Times when they wore clothes made from flour sacks because store-bought clothing was unaffordable. The sharecropping system in Depression-era Texas was essentially economic slavery. Families like the Murphys worked the land owned by wealthier farmers, and at the end of the season, after the landlord took his share, and after debts for seeds and tools were deducted, the sharecroppers were usually left with almost nothing. Bad weather or poor crop prices could leave them actually in debt, forced to work another season just to pay what they owed. Emmett Murphy was by all accounts a poor provider. He worked sporadically and drank heavily. He was often absent from the family for days or weeks at a time. When he was present, he was frequently drunk and sometimes violent. Josie Murphy bore the burden of keeping the family together and alive. She was a deeply religious woman who took her children to church whenever possible and instilled in them a moral code based on honesty, hard work, and faith. But religion could not fill empty stomachs or provide shoes for winter. Josie struggled constantly to feed her children. Sometimes she would go without eating herself so the children could have a little more. Sometimes she would send the older children, including Audie, to hunt or forage for anything edible. Audie learned to shoot a rifle when he was very young, not for sport, but because bringing home a rabbit or a squirrel might mean the difference between eating and going hungry. He became an exceptional marksman by necessity. Missing a shot meant wasting precious ammunition and potentially losing a meal. By age 8, Audie could consistently hit small targets at considerable distances using his father's borrowed rifle. This skill, developed out of desperate necessity, would later save his life and the lives of countless other soldiers. Life for the Murphy children was brutally hard. They worked in the fields as soon as they were old enough to walk, picking cotton, chopping weeds, doing whatever labor their small bodies could manage. Education was sporadic. The children attended school when they could, but often had to stay home to work, especially during planting and harvest seasons. Audie completed only 5 years of formal schooling. Reading and writing came hard to him, and he struggled with both throughout his life. But he was intelligent and observant. He watched how things worked. He learned practical skills, and he developed a quiet intensity of focus that would later characterize his combat performance. The Murphy children also learned to endure hardship without complaint. Complaining accomplished nothing and only made things worse. You simply endured. You kept working. You survived. This ability to endure terrible conditions without breaking would prove essential when Audie later faced the horrors of combat. The Great Depression that began in 1929 made hard times even harder. Cotton prices collapsed, work dried up. Even the small amounts of money sharecropping families had previously earned largely disappeared. The Murphy family, like millions of other rural poor Americans, sank deeper into desperation. Emmett Murphy's drinking got worse. He disappeared for longer periods, and then in 1934, when Audie was 9 years old, Emmett left permanently. He simply abandoned his wife and children, offering no explanation and providing no support. Josie Murphy was left alone with 12 children ranging from infants to teenagers. The burden was unbearable. She tried to hold the family together. She took in washing and ironing. She worked in other people's fields. The older children worked whatever jobs they could find, bringing home pennies. But it was not enough. The family was slowly starving, and Josie's health began to fail from the combination of overwork, malnutrition, and the stress of trying to keep her children alive. In 1936, when Audie was 11 years old, his mother, Josie Murphy, died. The official cause was exhaustion and heart failure, but in truth she died of poverty and the accumulated weight of years of desperate struggle. Audie had been close to his mother. She had been the one stable presence in his chaotic childhood. She had taught him to read the few words he knew. She had encouraged his education, such as it was. She had held the family together through sheer force of will, and now she was gone. The Murphy children were orphans with no money, no home, and no prospects. The younger children were sent to an orphanage. The older children scattered looking for work or moving in with relatives who could barely feed themselves. Audie and his older brother found work at a farm, earning $1 a day plus meals. It was hard physical labor from dawn until after dark, but at least they ate regularly and had a place to sleep. Audie was 12 years old and already a full-time worker doing a man's labor for a fraction of a man's wage. For the next several years, Audie worked whatever jobs he could find. He picked cotton. He worked in a sawmill. He labored on construction sites. He was small for his age and looked younger than he was, which made finding work harder. Employers wanted strong men, not scrawny boys. But Audie learned to work harder and longer than anyone expected. He discovered that if he simply outworked everyone else, employers would keep him on. He never complained. He never quit. He showed up early and stayed late. This work ethic, this refusal to ever give up, would later define his military career. He also continued hunting whenever he could, partly to supplement his diet, but also because it was one of the few things in his life that brought him satisfaction. When he was hunting, he was alone in the woods, away from the hardship and poverty. He could focus completely on the task, and when he made a perfect shot, dropping a rabbit or a squirrel with a single bullet, he felt a moment of pride. He was good at this. Maybe he was not good at reading or arithmetic. Maybe he was too small and too poor to be respected, but he could shoot better than men twice his age. By the time Audie reached his late teens, he had experienced more hardship than most people face in entire lifetimes. He had known hunger so severe his belly cramped. He had worn clothes so threadbare they barely covered him. He had worked until his hands bled and his back screamed. He had watched his mother literally work herself to death. He had lost his father to abandonment and his siblings to scattering. He had no education, no money, no prospects. He was 5 feet 5 inches tall and weighed 112 pounds. He looked like a teenager because he was still a teenager. Most people who met him probably dismissed him as insignificant. A poor kid who would likely spend his life doing manual labor until his body gave out, just like his mother. But inside that small frame was a core of steel that had been forged in the fires of desperate poverty. Audie Murphy had learned to survive when survival seemed impossible. He had learned to endure pain and hardship that would break most people. He had learned to focus completely on a task and execute it perfectly under pressure. And he had learned that sometimes the only way to survive is to fight. These lessons would soon be tested in ways Audie could never have imagined. On December 7, 1940, one Audie Murphy was 16 years old and working at a radio repair shop in Greenville, Texas. He was not particularly interested in radios, but the job paid, and that was all that mattered. That Sunday afternoon, news came over the radio that Japanese forces had attacked the American naval base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. Audie listened along with his co-workers as reports described ships burning, sailors dying, and America suddenly at war. President Roosevelt would ask Congress for a declaration of war the next day, and Congress would grant it. America was entering World War II. Like millions of other young American men, Audie Murphy immediately wanted to enlist. The motivations were complex. Certainly there was patriotism. The Japanese had attacked America, and America needed to fight back. But for someone like Audie, there were other factors too. The military offered regular meals and pay. It offered purpose and direction. It offered escape from the grinding poverty that had defined his entire life. It offered a chance to prove himself, to show that he was more than just another poor kid from Texas. It offered the possibility of mattering, but there was a problem. Audie was only 16, and the minimum age for military service was 18. He looked even younger than 16. He was still just over 5 feet 5 inches and weighed barely 110 pounds. When he tried to enlist at a Marine Corps recruiting station in Dallas, the recruiter took one look at him and laughed. Too small, the recruiter said. Too young. The Marines did not need children, they needed men. Audie tried the Navy next. Same result. Too small, too young. Then he tried the Army's paratroopers. Again rejected. No recruiter was going to accept someone who looked like a kid playing soldier. Audie was devastated. He wanted desperately to serve, but nobody would let him. For months, he continued trying different recruiting stations, hoping to find someone who would accept him. Finally, his sister helped him forge documents claiming he was 18. With these fake papers, he went to another army recruiting station, and this time he found a recruiter who either believed the documents or chose to overlook the obvious fact that Audie Murphy looked nowhere near 18 years old. In June 1940, a few months before his actual 18th birthday, Audie Murphy was accepted into the United States Army as an infantry private. Basic training should have been the hardest thing Audie had ever done. For most recruits it was. They were pushed physically beyond anything they had experienced. They were screamed at by drill sergeants. They were sleep deprived and exhausted and homesick. Many struggled. Some washed out, but for Audie Murphy basic training was almost easy compared to what he had already endured. The physical demands, he had been doing hard physical labor since he was a child, being yelled at. He had endured worse. The regimentation and discipline. Actually, it was refreshing to have clear rules and expectations. And the food. Regular meals 3 times a day was luxury beyond anything he had known. For the first time in his life, Audie was eating enough. He started gaining weight and muscle. He shot expert on the rifle range naturally. His marksmanship scores were among the highest in his training class. And he discovered that he was good at the tactical aspects of infantry training, understanding terrain, using cover, moving under fire. It came naturally to him. When training exercises required small unit actions, Audie instinctively understood what needed to be done. Officers noticed. Here was a kid who looked like he should be in high school, but who performed like a natural soldier. After completing basic training and advanced infantry training, Audie was assigned to Company B of the 15th Infantry Regiment of the 3rd Infantry Division. The 3rd Division was one of the most experienced combat divisions in the U.S. Army. It had already fought in North Africa and was preparing for the invasion of Sicily. Audie joined the division in early 1943. He was 17 years old, though officially the army thought he was 19. He weighed 115 pounds. He still looked like a boy. The other soldiers in his unit called him baby and kid and joked about his appearance. Some questioned whether he would be able to handle combat. How could someone so small and young, looking possibly survive actual fighting? Audie did not argue or try to prove himself through talk. He simply waited. He knew combat would come soon, and combat would show what kind of soldier he really was. In July 1943, the 3rd Infantry Division boarded transport ships in North Africa and sailed for Sicily as part of Operation Husky, the Allied invasion of Sicily. This would be Audie Murphy's first combat experience. He was 18 years old and had never been shot at. He had never seen anyone killed. He had no idea how he would react when the shooting started. The transport ships crossed the Mediterranean and on the night of July 9th approached the southern coast of Sicily. The plan called for a nighttime amphibious landing. Soldiers would transfer from the transport ships to smaller landing craft which would carry them to shore. Then they would wade through the surf and fight their way inland against German and Italian defenders. It was a terrifying prospect. Many soldiers would die in the water or on the beach. Everyone knew this. Everyone had heard about the casualties at other amphibious landings. As the landing craft approached the shore in darkness, Audie could hear artillery and small arms fire. He could see tracers arcing across the water. Ships offshore were firing support. Aircraft flew overhead. The noise was overwhelming. And then the landing craft hit sand and the ramp dropped, and officers were screaming for everyone to get out and move, and Audie Murphy ran down the ramp into waist, deep water, and waded toward shore while bullets kicked up spray around him. He made it to the beach. Others did too. Some did not. There was chaos and noise and fear. Officers shouted orders that were barely audible over the gunfire. Audie moved forward with his unit pushing inland away from the beach toward the objective. The fighting was confused and terrifying. German and Italian positions fired on the advancing Americans. American soldiers fired back. Audie found himself shooting at targets. He could barely see shadowy figures moving in the darkness, muzzle flashes indicating enemy positions. He had no time to think, he simply reacted. Training took over. See a target, acquire aim, fire, move, take cover, fire again. The night became a blur of violence, and then as dawn broke, the immediate fighting around his unit subsided. They had pushed inland and secured their initial objectives. Audie looked around at his fellow soldiers. Some were wounded, some were dead. He had survived, he had not panicked. He had done his job. But more than that, something inside him had changed. The fear he had felt before landing was still there, but it was manageable. He could function despite it, and he discovered something else. When he focused on the task, when he concentrated on shooting and moving and completing the mission, the fear receded. Combat clarity, everything became simple. Survival depended on performance. Emotion was irrelevant. This realization would define Audie Murphy's combat career. Over the next 5 weeks, the 3rd Infantry Division fought across Sicily against German and Italian forces, who were conducting a fighting retreat toward the mainland. The fighting was difficult. German troops were experienced and skilled. They used the mountainous terrain to their advantage, setting up defensive positions that had to be cleared by assault. American casualties mounted. Audie Murphy participated in numerous engagements. He learned quickly. He watched experienced soldiers and copied their techniques. He learned to read terrain and anticipate where enemy positions would be. He learned to shoot quickly and accurately under pressure, and he learned to kill. This was different from hunting animals. These were human beings, enemy soldiers, yes, but still human. The first time Audie killed a man, he felt something, a mixture of shock and revulsion, but that feeling faded quickly. In combat, there was no time for moral reflection. It was kill or be killed. The Germans were trying to kill him and his friends. He had to kill them first. It was that simple. Emotion was a luxury he could not afford. So he shut it down. He became cold and focused. He did what needed to be done. By the time Sicily fell in mid-August, Audie Murphy was a different person than the kid who had landed on that beach in July. He had seen combat. He had killed enemy soldiers. He had watched friends die. And he had proven to himself and his unit that despite his small size and youthful appearance, he was an effective soldier. He was no longer called baby or kid. He was now Murphy, and he was treated with respect because he had earned it. But something had been lost too. The remnants of his childhood, the last traces of innocence were gone, burned away in the fires of combat. Audie Murphy was 18 years old, and already he had the eyes of someone much older. Someone who had seen too much. Someone who carried a weight that would never entirely lift. After Sicily, the 3rd Infantry Division prepared for the invasion of mainland Italy. On September 9, 1940, 3 American forces landed at Salerno south of Naples in an attempt to establish a beachhead and drive north toward Rome. The Germans were waiting. The Salerno landings became one of the bloodiest operations of the Italian campaign. German artillery and mortar fire tore through the landing forces. American troops struggled to establish positions. For days the outcome was in doubt. German counterattacks nearly pushed the Americans back into the sea. Audie Murphy landed with his unit in the second wave. The beach was already littered with bodies and burning vehicles. The noise was indescribable. Artillery shells exploded constantly. Machine gun fire swept the beach. Men screamed for medics. Officers tried to organize the chaos. Audie moved forward into this hell and somehow survived. His unit fought for days, pushing inland meter by meter against fierce German resistance. Audie's combat skills continued to develop. He learned to spot enemy positions before they spotted him. He learned to move under fire using terrain and timing. He learned to shoot fast and accurately even when exhausted and terrified. And he learned to suppress his emotions completely during combat. Fear still existed, but he pushed it down and functioned anyway. After Salerno, the 3rd Division participated in the grueling campaign up the Italian peninsula. The fighting was slow and brutal. German forces used the mountainous terrain and harsh weather to their advantage. Every ridge had to be taken by assault. Every river crossing was contested. Winter arrived bringing cold and rain and snow. Soldiers fought in miserable conditions, living in muddy foxholes, eating cold rations, constantly wet and cold. Disease spread. Trench foot disabled hundreds of men. Combat exhaustion, psychological breakdown from the stress of prolonged fighting affected many. But Audie Murphy seemed immune. He kept fighting. He never complained. He never asked for rest. He simply did his job day after day, week after week. Officers noticed. Here was a soldier who never broke, who never faltered, who could be depended on absolutely. In December 1943, Audie was promoted to corporal in recognition of his combat performance. He was still only 18 years old. In January 1940, the 3rd Division participated in the landing at Anzio, an attempt to outflank German defensive lines by landing forces behind them. The Anzio landing was supposed to lead to a rapid advance on Rome, but instead it became a stalemate. Allied forces were pinned on the beachhead for months under constant German artillery fire. Soldiers called it Hell's Beachhead. There was no safe area. German artillery could reach every part of the beachhead. Soldiers lived in fear of the random shell that could kill them at any moment. Many men broke psychologically under this stress. But again, Audie Murphy endured. He fought in the defensive positions around the beachhead. He participated in patrols into no man's land, and in one engagement he demonstrated the aggressive combat style that would define his legend. His platoon was pinned down by German machine gun fire. Men were being hit. The advance had stalled. Without waiting for orders, Audie moved forward alone using cover to get close to the German position. Then he charged, throwing grenades and firing his rifle. He killed the German machine gun crew by himself. The platoon was able to advance. Audie returned to his position as if nothing unusual had happened. For this action, he received his first decoration, the Bronze Star with V device for valor. But Anzio also brought Audie his first wound. During a German artillery barrage, shrapnel tore into his hip. The wound was not life-threatening, but it required evacuation to a field hospital. Audie was furious. He did not want to leave his unit. He argued with medics, saying he was fine, but the wound was serious enough that he had no choice. He spent 2 weeks in the hospital recovering. During that time, his unit continued fighting at Anzio. Some of his friends were killed. Audie felt guilty that he had not been there. This guilt would become a recurring theme. Every time he was wounded or evacuated, he felt he was abandoning his friends. When he returned to his unit in February, he was welcomed back warmly. The men were glad to have him back. They had come to depend on his skills and his calmness under fire. Audie Murphy, at age 18, had already become one of the most respected soldiers in his company. In May 1940, the stalemate at Anzio finally broke. Allied forces broke out of the beachhead and began driving toward Rome. The 3rd Division participated in heavy fighting as German forces conducted a fighting retreat. During this period, Audie Murphy experienced an event that would change him profoundly. His closest friend in the unit was a soldier named Latty Tipton, who everyone called Brandon. Brandon and Audie had become close during training and had fought together through Sicily, Salerno, and Anzio. They trusted each other completely. In combat, they often worked together as a team. They shared foxholes and rations. They talked about what they would do after the war. Brandon was planning to go to college and become a teacher. Audie was not sure what he would do, but he figured he would find work somewhere. The friendship was one of the few positive things in the nightmare of war. But on a day in late May, during an assault on a German position, Brandon was hit by machine gun fire. Audie was nearby and saw him fall. He ran to Brandon's side, ignoring the bullets flying around him. Brandon had been shot in the chest multiple times. He was dying, and both of them knew it. Audie held his friend and told him he would be okay, even though it was obvious he would not. Brandon looked at Audie and tried to speak, but blood filled his mouth. Then he died. Audie Murphy held his dead friend in the middle of a battlefield while Germans continued firing at them. Something broke inside Audie Murphy that day. The careful emotional control he had maintained snapped. Grief and rage flooded through him. He gently laid Brandon's body down, and then he stood up and walked toward the German position that had killed his friend. Other soldiers shouted at him to get down to take cover, but he ignored them. He walked forward, firing his rifle, killing every German soldier he could see. He walked right into the enemy position and killed the machine gun crew with his rifle and grenades. Then he killed several more German soldiers who were trying to retreat. By the time he stopped, he had killed at least 10 enemy soldiers and single-handedly neutralized a position that had pinned down his entire company. He returned to his lines in silence. When officers asked if he was all right, he did not respond. Something fundamental had changed. Audie Murphy had been a good soldier before Brandon's death. He had been skilled and brave and effective. But after Brandon died, he became something else. He became a killing machine, cold, ruthless, utterly without fear. Other soldiers began to notice the change. Murphy never smiled anymore. He never joked. He spoke rarely and only when necessary. In combat, he was terrifyingly efficient. He killed Germans with mechanical precision, showing no emotion. Officers described him as fearless, but that was not quite right. He still felt fear, but he no longer cared about it. The worst thing that could happen had already happened. His friend was dead. What did his own death matter? Audie's combat effectiveness increased dramatically after Brandon's death. He volunteered for every dangerous mission. He led patrols into enemy territory. He took risks that seemed suicidal, but somehow he always survived. He killed enemy soldiers at an astonishing rate. Official records credit him with dozens of kills during this period, but the actual number was likely much higher. His fellow soldiers both admired and feared him. They wanted him on their side because he was so effective, but they also saw that something was wrong. Murphy was using combat as a kind of suicide. He was trying to get killed, but his skills were so great that he kept surviving. Officers recognized his value but worried about his psychological state. In June 1940, Audie was promoted to sergeant and given a squad to lead. He was 19 years old. In August 1940, the 3rd Infantry Division participated in Operation Dragoon, the invasion of southern France. American forces landed on the French Riviera and drove north toward the German border. The fighting was intense, but the Germans were retreating and the advance was rapid. Audie Murphy's squad participated in numerous engagements. By now, Audie had a reputation throughout the regiment as the deadliest soldier in the division. Stories circulated about his combat prowess, how he had single-handedly destroyed machine gun nests, how he seemed immune to fear, how he killed Germans with cold efficiency. Some stories were exaggerated, but many were true. Audie did not care about the stories. He simply focused on the mission: kill Germans, keep his men alive. Advance, that was all that mattered. His squad loved him because he kept them alive. Audie took care of his men. He made sure they had ammunition and rations. He positioned them carefully in combat to minimize casualties. He took the most dangerous positions himself, and when fighting started, he led from the front. As the 3rd Division pushed north through France, Audie's kill count continued to climb. In one engagement near Montélimar, his squad was ambushed by German troops. Audie killed 7 German soldiers in the first minutes of the fight, allowing his squad to take cover and return fire. In another fight, his squad came under fire from a German-held farmhouse. Audie circled around alone, entered the farmhouse, and killed all 6 defenders, clearing the building room by himself. In yet another engagement, Audie and another soldier held off an entire German platoon for 2 hours, allowing their company to withdraw from an untenable position. For these and other actions, Audie received the Silver Star and was recommended for promotion to lieutenant. The recommendation noted his exceptional combat leadership and his complete disregard for personal safety. By October 1940, Audie Murphy had killed over 100 enemy soldiers by conservative official estimate. The actual number was probably twice that. He was 19 years old. In October, Audie was promoted to second lieutenant, receiving a battlefield commission that elevated him from enlisted sergeant to commissioned officer. This was extremely rare. Most officers came from officer candidate schools or college rock programs. But Audie's combat record was so exceptional that his commanders recommended direct commissioning. He was now Lieutenant Murphy, commanding a platoon. He was barely old enough to vote, but he was responsible for 40 men. The promotion did nothing to change Audie's combat style. He still led from the front. He still took the most dangerous positions. He still killed Germans with cold efficiency, but now he had more responsibility. His decisions affected more lives. He took this responsibility seriously. He studied tactics. He learned to coordinate with other platoons and with artillery and armor support. He became not just an effective killer, but an effective leader. His men trusted him absolutely because they knew he would never ask them to do something he would not do himself. By December 1940, the 3rd Infantry Division was fighting in the Colmar Pocket, a German-held salient in eastern France near the German border. The fighting was some of the worst of the war. Winter had arrived, bringing freezing temperatures and snow. German forces were defending desperately, knowing that losing the Colmar Pocket would open the way to Germany itself. American forces attacked repeatedly, trying to reduce the pocket, but German defenses were strong and well prepared. The 3rd Division took heavy casualties in brutal fighting. Soldiers fought in temperatures well below freezing. Frostbite disabled as many men as combat wounds. Living conditions were miserable. Soldiers lived in frozen foxholes. Water froze in canteens. Rations were so cold they had to be thawed over fires. Sleep was nearly impossible. The stress of constant combat in terrible conditions broke many men. Combat exhaustion casualties skyrocketed. But Audie Murphy kept fighting. He seemed immune to the conditions that devastated others. He endured the cold and the exhaustion and the fear. He led his platoon in repeated assaults on German positions. In one attack, his platoon came under heavy machine gun fire from a fortified German bunker. Casualties mounted, the attack stalled. Audie ordered his men to provide covering fire, and then he advanced alone across open ground toward the bunker. German machine gun fire tore up the ground around him. Somehow, none of the bullets hit him. He reached the bunker and threw grenades through the firing ports, killing the crew inside. His platoon was able to advance. For this action, Audie received his 2nd Silver Star. His commanders noted that his bravery was becoming routine. He performed actions that would earn most soldiers the highest decorations on what seemed like a weekly basis. In early January 1945, Audie's company was ordered to take a heavily defended German position near the town of Holzweiler. The position was key to breaking the German line in that sector. Intelligence indicated strong German defenses, including tanks, infantry, and artillery. The attack would be costly. Audie's platoon would be part of the assault. On the morning of January 26, the attack began. American artillery bombarded the German positions for an hour. Then the infantry advanced. Audie's platoon moved forward across frozen fields. Almost immediately, they came under intense German fire. Machine guns and mortars tore into the advancing Americans. Men fell. The attack bogged down. Audie tried to move his platoon forward, but the German fire was too heavy. Then German tanks appeared, moving to counterattack. 6 Panzer tanks and 250 German infantry advancing toward the outnumbered American positions. If they were not stopped, they would overrun the American lines and the attack would fail. Casualties would be catastrophic. Someone had to delay them. Someone had to buy time for the American forces to withdraw and regroup. Audie Murphy saw an M10 tank destroyer burning in the field ahead. The crew had been killed by German fire and had abandoned the vehicle. But the 50 caliber machine gun on top of the tank destroyer was still operational. The burning M10 was positioned perfectly to cover the German advance. If someone could man that machine gun, they could inflict heavy casualties on the advancing Germans and delay their attack. But the M10 was burning. Ammunition inside was cooking off. The vehicle could explode at any moment, and it was completely exposed in the middle of an open field. Any German with a rifle could shoot whoever climbed on top. It was a suicide position. Audie ordered his platoon to fall back to the woods and establish a defensive line. Then he ran forward to the burning M10, climbed on top, and swung the .50 caliber machine gun toward the advancing Germans. And for the next hour, Lieutenant Audie Murphy, age 19, stood alone on that burning tank destroyer and held off an entire German company. When Audie Murphy climbed onto the burning M10 tank destroyer on January 26, 1945, and began firing the .50 caliber machine gun at the advancing German forces, he was committing to a position that should have killed him within minutes. The M10 was burning intensely. Flames licked up from the engine compartment. Ammunition stored inside the vehicle was cooking off small arms rounds exploding from the heat, creating popping sounds and sending bullets in random directions. At any moment, the main ammunition stores could detonate, destroying the vehicle and killing anyone on or near it. German soldiers could see Audie clearly. He was standing upright on top of the vehicle, operating the machine gun, completely exposed. Every German soldier with a rifle could shoot at him, German machine gunners could target him, German snipers could line up careful shots, and yet somehow in that first minutes none of the hundreds of bullets the Germans fired hit him. It seemed impossible. Bullets tore through his uniform. Bullets struck the M10 around him, sending up sparks, but none hit flesh. Audie ignored the incoming fire. He focused completely on the task. The .50 caliber machine gun was a devastating weapon. Each round was the length of a man's hand and could tear through body armor and light vehicles. The gun had a range of over a mile and could fire over 500 rounds per minute. Audie aimed at the German infantry advancing across the field. He fired controlled bursts. Each burst dropped German soldiers. He traversed the gun left and right, cutting down anyone who tried to advance. German soldiers fell in the snow. Officers screamed orders, trying to coordinate an assault. German infantry tried to flank the position, moving through trees and ditches. But Audie spotted them and fired. More Germans fell. The German advance slowed. Soldiers took cover. The momentum of the attack stalled. This was exactly what Audie needed to accomplish. Buy time. Delay the Germans long enough for American forces to establish a defensive line. Every minute he held this position was another minute his company had to dig in. But holding the position required more than just firing the machine gun. The Germans were firing artillery and mortars, trying to knock out the burning M10. Shells exploded around the vehicle, throwing up frozen earth and shrapnel. Audie felt shrapnel tear through his uniform and cut his leg, but he kept firing. German tanks were advancing too, 6 panzers moving to support the infantry. Their main guns could blow the M10 to pieces. Audie needed artillery support. He had a field radio with him. While firing the machine gun with one hand, he used the other hand to call in artillery fire. He gave coordinates. He adjusted fire. American artillery shells began landing among the German positions. German soldiers were torn apart by explosions. A German tank took a direct hit and brewed up flames, shooting into the sky. But the other tanks kept coming, and the German infantry, despite heavy casualties, kept trying to advance. They had orders to break through, and they were determined to execute those orders. The heat from the burning M10 became unbearable. The soles of Audie's boots began to melt. His hands were burned from touching hot metal. The smoke from the fire made breathing difficult. Ammunition continued to cook off inside the vehicle, each explosion bringing the possibility of catastrophic detonation closer. Audie's mind registered all of this, but he did not stop. He kept firing. He kept calling artillery strikes. He was completely focused on the mission. Everything else faded away. There was only the gun and the targets and the radio. Time lost meaning. Later, Audie would not be able to remember clearly how long he stood on that burning vehicle. It felt like hours, but also like minutes. Everything blurred together in a continuous stream of action and reaction. Then the .50 caliber machine gun ran out of ammunition. The bolt locked back on an empty chamber. Audie had fired every round in the ammunition box. German infantry were now within 100 yards, some even closer. They saw the gun was empty. They started to rush forward. Audie climbed down from the burning M10. German small arms fire kicked up snow and dirt around him as he ran toward the tree line. Artillery fire he had called an earlier landed danger-close shells exploding so near to his path that shrapnel tore holes in his uniform and cut his skin. But he made it to the trees. His men were there waiting. They had established a defensive line. Audie immediately began organizing them, positioning machine guns, coordinating fields of fire. The Germans reached the tree line and the fighting became brutal. Close-range firefights in the woods, but the Americans held, and as German casualties mounted and the American defensive line proved too strong, the German attack finally faltered and broke. The Germans withdrew. The position was secure. Audie Murphy had single-handedly held off 250 German soldiers and 6 tanks for over an hour. He had killed or wounded over 50 enemy soldiers by himself. He had called artillery fire so close to his own position that he had been wounded by friendly shrapnel. And he had done all of this while standing on a burning vehicle that could have exploded at any second, killing him instantly. When officers asked him what had happened, he simply reported the facts. He had manned the machine gun, he had fired at the enemy, he had withdrawn when the ammunition ran out. He showed no emotion. He acted as if what he had done was routine. But it was not routine. It was one of the most extraordinary individual combat actions in American military history. For this action, Audie Murphy would be awarded the Medal of Honor. The Medal of Honor is the highest military decoration awarded by the United States. It is given for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of life, above and beyond the call of duty in actual combat. The standards for receiving the Medal of Honor are extraordinarily high. Of the millions of Americans who served in World War II, fewer than 500 received the Medal of Honor. Many who received it were awarded posthumously because the actions that earned the medal resulted in their deaths. Audie Murphy's commanding officers immediately recommended him for the Medal of Honor after the action at Holtz, where on January 26, 1945, the recommendation described in detail what Murphy had done, how he had stood alone on a burning vehicle under intense enemy fire, how he had held off an entire company of German soldiers, how he had killed over 50 enemy combatants, how he had called artillery fire within yards of his own position, how he had done all of this while wounded, and how he had refused evacuation until the position was secure. The recommendation was endorsed at every level of command, up to division and corps headquarters. Everyone who reviewed the action agreed that Murphy's conduct met and exceeded the standards for the Medal of Honor, but Murphy himself did not care about medals. When asked about the action afterward, he said he had simply done what needed to be done. Someone had to delay the Germans. He had been in position to do it, so he did it, nothing more. This attitude of treating extraordinary heroism as routine was characteristic of Murphy. He never boasted. He never sought recognition. He simply did his job and expected others to do theirs. His men revered him for this. He was not a glory hound. He was a soldier who cared about the mission and about keeping his men alive. The medals were irrelevant, but the Medal of Honor carried practical benefits beyond recognition. Recipients received increased pay, they received certain privileges, and most importantly, they became symbols. The Medal of Honor represented American valor. Recipients were held up as examples of what American fighting men could achieve. The military needed heroes, and Medal of Honor recipients filled that role. In June 1945, a few weeks after Germany surrendered, General Alexander Patch, commander of the 7th Army, presented Audie Murphy with the Medal of Honor in a ceremony in France. Murphy stood at attention while the medal was placed around his neck. Photographers took pictures. Officers saluted. Murphy's face showed no emotion. He accepted the medal, politely thanked the general, and returned to his unit. For him, the ceremony was an obligation, not a celebration. The war in Europe was over. Germany had surrendered, but Audie Murphy felt no joy. His friends were dead. Brandon was dead. Hundreds of men he had known were dead. What was there to celebrate? The medal could not bring them back. In addition to the Medal of Honor, Audie had earned the Distinguished Service Cross, 2 Silver Stars, the Legion of Merit, the Bronze Star, 3 Purple Hearts, and over 20 other decorations. He was the most decorated American combat soldier of World War II. He had killed over 240 enemy soldiers by official count. He had been wounded 3 times. He had risen from private to first lieutenant, and he was 20 years old. When World War II ended in Europe in May 1945, Audie Murphy's combat career ended as well. His division was scheduled to be sent to the Pacific to participate in the invasion of Japan. Murphy expected to be fighting again within months. He had survived the European War, and now he would have to survive the Pacific War. But in August 1945, the United States dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Japan surrendered. The war was over. Audie Murphy would not have to fight again. This should have been a relief. He had survived combat when thousands of others had not. He could go home, but Audie did not feel relief. He felt empty. For 3 years his life had been defined by combat. Wake up, fight, try to survive. Kill the enemy before they kill you, that had been his entire existence. Now suddenly there was no more fighting, no more mission. What was he supposed to do? He had no education. He had no civilian job skills. He had no family to speak of. He was 20 years old with no idea how to live in a world that was not trying to kill him. The army offered to keep Murphy in service. With his record, he could have a long military career. He could attend officer training schools. He could rise through the ranks, but Murphy had no interest in peacetime military service. He had been a combat soldier. That was all he knew. Garrison duty and peacetime training held no appeal. So, in September 1945, Audie Murphy was discharged from the United States Army. He was given a small mustering out payment and a train ticket home to Texas. He left the army with his decorations and his uniform and his memories. He had no plan. He had no prospects. He was the most decorated American soldier of the war, and he had no idea what he was going to do with his life. When he arrived back in Texas, reporters wanted to interview him. Local politicians wanted to honor him. There were parades and ceremonies. Murphy endured them politely, but he hated the attention. People called him a hero. They wanted him to talk about combat. They wanted war stories. He gave them sanitized versions of events, leaving out the blood and terror and horror. What they wanted was glory stories. What he remembered was friends dying. Murphy also discovered that civilian life was much harder than he expected. He had trouble sleeping. Every night he had nightmares about combat. He dreamed about friends dying. He dreamed about killing Germans. He woke up drenched in sweat, sometimes screaming. He could not sleep without a loaded pistol under his pillow. Even then, he would wake at the slightest sound, convinced he was under attack. Loud noises startled him. Crowds made him anxious. He felt constantly on edge, as if danger could erupt at any moment. He did not understand what was happening to him. He thought maybe he was going crazy. But what he was experiencing was what we now call post-traumatic stress disorder. In 1945, it was called shell shock or combat fatigue, and it was poorly understood. Veterans were expected to just get over it, to tough it out. Complaining about psychological problems was seen as weakness, so Murphy said nothing. He suffered in silence. He also had no money and no job. He tried various types of work. He worked in a garage. He tried construction. Nothing held his interest. Everything seemed pointless. He was not suited for normal work. He had been a warrior. What use was a warrior in peacetime? He felt lost and directionless. He started having thoughts about suicide. Sometimes he sat with his loaded pistol and thought about just ending it. The pain would stop, the nightmares would stop, but something always held him back. Maybe it was stubbornness. Murphy had survived the worst that war could throw at him. He was not going to let peace kill him, so he kept going, day by day, looking for something, anything that would give his life meaning. In 1946, about a year after his discharge, an actor named James Cagney saw Audie Murphy's picture on the cover of Life magazine. The article described Murphy's war record and showed pictures of him receiving the Medal of Honor. Cagney was struck by Murphy's appearance. Murphy looked young and vulnerable, almost innocent, but the article described him as the most decorated soldier in American history. The contrast was compelling. Cagney thought Murphy might have potential as an actor. He invited Murphy to come to Hollywood for a screen test. Murphy, who had nothing better to do and no prospects, accepted. He traveled to Hollywood with no expectations. He had never acted, he had no training, he could barely read a script. But Cagney saw something in him, a natural presence, an authenticity. Cagney helped Murphy get started in Hollywood, introducing him to agents and studio executives. Murphy was given small roles in low-budget films. He was terrible at acting at first. He was stiff and uncomfortable. Reading lines did not come naturally, but directors saw potential. Murphy's war record gave him credibility for military roles. And he had an unusual quality on screen, a stillness, an intensity. When the camera was on him, you watched him. Murphy slowly improved as an actor. He took acting lessons. He studied other actors. He worked hard because that was the only way he knew how to approach anything. By 1948, he was getting better roles in better films. He appeared in westerns and war movies. Studio executives marketed him as a war hero who became a movie star. The story appealed to audiences. Murphy was becoming modestly successful. He was making enough money to survive, but he was not happy. Acting felt hollow. He was pretending to be a soldier. He had been a real soldier. The distinction bothered him. And Hollywood life was alien to him. The parties and the glamour and the superficiality. He did not fit. He was an introvert who had grown up in desperate poverty and fought in a terrible war. Hollywood socialites seemed trivial by comparison. He felt like an outsider, but he kept working because he needed the money and because he did not know what else to do. In 1949, Murphy published his autobiography titled To Hell and Back. He had worked with a ghostwriter to turn his war experiences into a book. The book was a bestseller. Americans were fascinated by Murphy's story, the poor kid from Texas who became the greatest American warrior. The book described his combat experiences in vivid detail, though Murphy toned down the worst parts. He left out how much he had enjoyed killing Germans. He left out the nightmares and the psychological damage. He presented a version of his story that was heroic but sanitized. The book sold hundreds of thousands of copies and made Murphy financially secure for the first time in his life. Universal Pictures bought the film rights and planned to turn To Hell and Back into a major motion picture. And they wanted Audie Murphy to play himself. Filming To Hell and Back in 1954 was emotionally devastating for Audie Murphy. He had to recreate some of the worst experiences of his life. He had to stand in fake battlefields and pretend to kill German soldiers played by actors. He had to film the scene where his character Brandon dies. He had to relive the action at Holtz, where he stood on the burning tank destroyer. Universal built a replica M10 for the filming. Murphy stood on it while cameras rolled and pyrotechnic effects created the illusion of combat. For Murphy, it was not illusion. It was memory. Standing on that fake burning tank destroyer brought back the terror and the adrenaline and the certainty of death. He had flashbacks on set. Sometimes he would freeze, unable to continue. Other times he would snap at crew members. The director and producers were sympathetic. They knew Murphy was struggling, but they also knew his presence in the film was essential. No one else could play Audie Murphy, so they worked around his psychological episodes and slowly the film was completed. To Hell and Back was released in 1955 and became a huge success. It was one of Universal's highest-grossing films of the year. Audiences loved it. Murphy received excellent reviews. Critics praised his natural, understated performance. Playing himself, Murphy brought authenticity that no trained actor could match. The film made Murphy genuinely famous. Before he had been a war hero and a minor actor. Now he was a movie star, but fame did not bring happiness. Murphy's psychological problems were getting worse, not better. The nightmares continued. He drank heavily trying to numb the pain. He took sleeping pills to fight the insomnia. He became dependent on the pills, taking more and more to achieve the same effect. His friends and family worried about him, but Murphy insisted he was fine. He was tough. He could handle it. Asking for help felt like weakness. Murphy continued acting through the 1950s, appearing in over 30 films. Most were westerns and war movies. He was cast as the tough soldier or the stoic cowboy. He was good in these roles because they were close to who he really was, but he never became a great actor in the artistic sense. He was competent and professional, but limited in range. Critics noted that he always played variations of himself, but audiences did not care. They liked him. They liked his authenticity, and studios kept hiring him because his films made money. Murphy earned good money during this period. He invested some of it poorly, losing significant sums in bad business deals. He also developed expensive habits, gambling, horses. He bought ranches and breeding stock. Some investments paid off, others failed. His financial situation remained precarious despite his fame. Audie Murphy married twice. His first marriage to actress Wanda Hendricks in 1949 ended in divorce after less than 2 years. The marriage was troubled from the start. Murphy's psychological problems made him a difficult husband. The nightmares, the sudden rages, the drinking. Hendricks later said she had been frightened of Murphy. She said he would wake up screaming, attacking pillows, thinking they were enemy soldiers. She said he slept with a loaded pistol under his pillow, and she was afraid he would shoot her during a nightmare. The marriage could not survive these problems. After the divorce, Murphy dated various actresses but maintained no long-term relationships. He was too damaged, too haunted by war. Women found him attractive initially, but living with him was difficult. The darkness that war had planted in him made normal relationships nearly impossible. In 1950, Murphy married Pamela Archer, a former airline stewardess. This marriage lasted, though it was difficult. Pamela knew about Murphy's problems when she married him, but she believed she could help him. She loved him and thought love would be enough. It was not. Murphy's nightmares continued. His addiction to sleeping pills worsened. He became financially irresponsible, gambling away money and investing in schemes that failed. Pamela had to manage the household finances because Murphy could not be trusted with money. They had 2 sons, Terence and James. Murphy loved his children but was not an attentive father. He was often away filming movies. When he was home, he was often distant and moody. The children learned not to disturb their father when he was in one of his dark moods. Pamela became the stable center of the family, holding everything together while Murphy struggled with his demons. Murphy tried to address his psychological problems but did not know how. Therapy was not really an option in the 1950s. Psychological problems were stigmatized. Men especially were expected to be tough, to suck it up. Complaining about mental health was seen as weakness. Murphy did not want to be seen as weak. He had built his reputation on being the toughest soldier. How could he admit that he could not handle his own mind? So he self-medicated. Alcohol, sleeping pills, work. He threw himself into acting not because he loved it, but because it gave him something to focus on. When he was working, he did not have to think about the war. But eventually the work would end and he would be alone with his thoughts again, and the nightmares would return. By the early 1960s, Audie Murphy's film career was declining. Tastes were changing. Westerns and war movies were becoming less popular. Murphy was aging, and the roles that had sustained his career were going to younger actors. He still got work, but the quality of projects declined. He appeared in low-budget films that went straight to television. His income dropped significantly. This would have been manageable if Murphy had been financially prudent, but he had never learned to manage money. He made poor investments. He gambled excessively. He bought expensive horses and tried to run a breeding operation that lost money. He borrowed heavily against future earnings. By 1965, Murphy was deeply in debt. He owed money to multiple creditors. His ranch was mortgaged. His earning potential was declining and his debts were mounting. He was facing financial ruin. Murphy tried to solve his financial problems by working more. He took any role he could get. He appeared in cheap Italian-made westerns. He did television guest spots. He tried producing films but lost money. Nothing worked. The debt kept growing. By 1968, Murphy was essentially broke. He had to sell his ranch and most of his possessions. He moved his family to a modest house. The man who had been one of the most decorated soldiers in American history and a movie star was now struggling to pay bills. It was humiliating. Murphy sank into depression. He drank more heavily. His marriage suffered. Pamela threatened to leave him unless he addressed his problems. Murphy knew she was right but felt helpless. How had his life come to this? He had survived poverty. He had survived war. And now financial problems were destroying him. It seemed absurd. In 1969, Murphy was caught in a minor scandal. He was arrested for assault after a bar fight. The charges were eventually dropped, but the publicity was damaging. Murphy's wholesome war hero image was tarnished. The public learned about his drinking, his gambling, his financial problems. Some people were sympathetic, others were disappointed. They had believed Murphy was a hero. Now he seemed like a troubled man who could not manage his own life. Murphy hated the publicity. He had always valued privacy. Now his personal problems were being discussed in newspapers. It reinforced his belief that fame was worthless. All the medals and all the movies had not made him happy. They had not protected him from the memories of war. They had not saved him from financial ruin. What was the point of any of it? In 1969, something happened that would become one of Audie Murphy's most important contributions to American society. He began speaking publicly about his psychological problems. Specifically, he began talking about what was then called battle fatigue and what we now call post-traumatic stress disorder. Murphy testified before Congress about the needs of Vietnam veterans who were returning home with severe psychological problems. He described his own struggles, the nightmares that had plagued him for decades, the addiction to sleeping pills, the difficulty adjusting to civilian life, the feeling of being disconnected from people who had not experienced combat. He spoke about these things openly and honestly, using his fame to draw attention to an issue that most people preferred to ignore. This was revolutionary. In 1969, talking about psychological problems, especially for men, and especially for military veterans, was considered shameful. Veterans were supposed to be tough. They were supposed to come home and get on with their lives without complaining. Mental illness was stigmatized. Admitting to psychological problems could ruin careers, but Audie Murphy was too famous to ignore. He was the most decorated soldier of World War II. If anyone had a right to speak about the psychological costs of war, it was him. And he used his platform courageously. He told reporters about his nightmares. He told them about the loaded pistol he kept under his pillow. He told them about the times he had considered suicide. He told them that he had been fighting the war for 25 years, even though the shooting had stopped in 1945. Murphy's public statements about PTSD had significant impact. Other veterans began speaking about their own experiences. Mental health professionals began studying combat trauma more seriously. The stigma surrounding combat-related psychological problems began slowly to erode. It would take decades before PTSD was formally recognized as a medical condition in the 1980s, but Murphy's willingness to speak about it publicly in 1969 helped lay the groundwork. He showed that psychological wounds were as real as physical wounds, that surviving combat did not mean being unaffected by it, that needing help was not weakness. For many veterans, Murphy's openness was liberating. If Audie Murphy could admit he struggled, then maybe they could too. In this sense, Murphy's courage in speaking about PTSD may have saved more lives than his combat actions did. His honesty gave permission for millions of veterans to acknowledge their own pain and seek help. On May 28, 1970, Audie Murphy boarded a private twin-engine Aero Commander aircraft in Atlanta, Georgia. He was traveling to Virginia to close a business deal. The plane also carried 4 other passengers, including the pilot. The weather was poor. Storms were moving through the region. Visibility was low. but the pilot decided to proceed with the flight. The plane took off from DeKalb, Peachtree Airport, and headed north. About an hour into the flight, as the plane approached Roanoke, Virginia, it encountered severe weather, rain, clouds, strong winds. The pilot was flying through mountain terrain in conditions where visual navigation was impossible. He was depending on instruments. At approximately 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the plane crashed into Brush Mountain near Catawba, Virginia. The aircraft hit trees on the side of the mountain and disintegrated. All 6 people on board were killed instantly. Audie Murphy died in the crash. He was 45 years old. The crash site was remote. Heavy weather prevented immediate rescue efforts. It took searchers 2 days to locate the wreckage. When they finally reached the site, they found the scattered remains of the aircraft and the bodies of the passengers. Audie Murphy's body was identified through his wallet and his Medal of Honor, which he had been carrying. The news of Murphy's death shocked the nation. Newspaper headlines announced that